Hello, everyone out there in ethnically correct land. Thank you so much for being with us this evening on a night when everything is perfect. The stars are shining, the wine is being sipped, and everyone feels a sense of purpose and community. And that is what we want to inspire out there in the ether, is the sense of community that you have the opportunity, the forum, and the space in which to share experiences, in which to share ideas, and really confront yourself and one another about a variety of things, whether they be prejudice or whether they be notions about our role in society as ethnic people or as non-ethnic people. And so tonight's topic has to deal with how our culture dictates how we confront one another when we are dissatisfied with the other person's behavior. So when you are in a relationship, whether that be friendship, a colleague at work, a lover, etc., when the other person is not meeting your standards, or when they do something that makes you feel uncomfortable, hurt, etc., how do you respond? And the question we have to ask is your background, is your culture, is the environment in which you're living, does that dictate how you respond? And so we're going to really carry this topic throughout the various stages of development from childhood to adulthood. So, Tehu, you were the one that really inspired this topic. So let's start off with you.
Yes, thank you, Alex. I think our culture plays a very important role in how we express our dissatisfaction. You know, if you have been, or not been rather, taught to that open confrontation and direct communication has not been encouraged in your culture, then you really struggle with actually being upfront and having that authentic honesty, because you are so concerned and worried about upsetting the other person that you may come across as rude, as unkept, whatever you want to call it, that it prohibits you from actually saying how you feel. And that can, I think, in my opinion, I think culture plays a really important role in that. If you're, particularly, for example, in my culture, if Middle East, I have Middle Eastern parents, and in Middle Eastern culture, it is absolutely not encouraged to be direct. People say what they don't say what they mean, and they don't mean what they say all the time. You have to learn to read between the lines. There's a lot of nonverbal language. There's a lot of keeping up appearances and just kind of beating around the bush. And unfortunately, that's a total cultural norm. That open, direct confrontation, communication would be completely inappropriate. And you're taught actually from a young age not to communicate with one another like that at all. And actually you get reprimanded if you do. You would get into trouble if you do that. That's a way of upbringing. That's a style. However, I think the problem is when you are in Western culture, it doesn't serve you very well. It also causes a lot of problems in relationships. You really, you don't really know what you're dealing with sometimes on the other end. And how does that other person even get to know who you are when you don't communicate your expectations? And you feel like they're not being fulfilled. You're not even saying what they are. So the environment, your background, and your culture, I think, play a huge role in that.
I'd have to totally agree with you. When I heard your topic, it immediately made me think of work, corporate America, because that's where I feel like I am the most controlled, where I have to control, my dissatisfaction, my emotions. That's where I really have to kind of be calculated in how I come across, because I'm of the belief that there are three things that will judge, or that will inadvertently make you successful or unsuccessful in the work environment. That is, if you are dependable. So if you come to work on time, if you are someone who gets projects in on time, comes to meetings on time, that's one thing that you're judged on. If you're likable.
That's
also
big.
Yeah.
That's huge.
And the third thing is if you're knowledgeable. And if you have two of those three things, you can get by in your work environment. And so thinking about that, I thought as an African American woman, my two things have always been to be likable and dependable. I'm going to be knowledgeable about certain aspects and certain things, but I don't depend all the time on being the smartest person in the room. I'm comfortable saying that because I can still get by, because I still feel confident in what I know. But what I really work towards is being dependable and being likable. And for me, in corporate America for over 11 years, in the beginning, always feared not being likable, or feared people thinking that I was too direct, or feared, walking into the room and being, the angry Black woman. So I tried everything to not be that. And it never really served me. And I finally realized, after a particularly bad review on recently, I had a particularly bad review, and one of the comments that was made was that people are afraid of setting me off. And so for a person who is always worried about being likable, for that to have been the comment or the reprimand, it got me to really changing how I look at things. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I can be as likable, I can be as funny, I can be as open as I feel like I am being. And at the end of the day, if another person has a preconceived notion about who I am as a Black woman, it doesn't matter. So I can't play to their expectations or make another person feel comfortable. And that's where I kind of am in my career right now. It took 36 years to be, or about 10 or 11 years. I've been alive for 36 years, 10 or 11 years to get there. But now I realize that I can't worry about that. But it was a big worry for me. So if there are any African American women listening out there who have that fear and who, constantly grapple with that, I say you can't change it.
And Winter, I just want to add to that as well, since you're on this bit, that also I feel like as women, we're socialized, absolutely, completely socialized not to do that. What are you taught as a little girl? Be nice, be polite. All the little girly feminine things that you're taught with are completely in conflict with direct, open, blunt communication.
Well,
are they not?
No, not for me. Honestly, I had a totally different experience being a little girl. The women around me all had to be strong. I was raised by all strong Black women. Not that there were no men around, but my influences were all women. So all of the women around me were assertive. So that's all I know. My mother is a assertive woman. I mean, it's funny when we go to dinner, our dynamic is so interesting, because if she doesn't have the right meal, if there's an ingredient off, she has no problem saying, "Excuse me, something's off." And so saying all that to say that I don't think that has been my experience. In fact, it's been to be the opposite.
And it's so funny you say that, because growing up as a little Mexican boy, my parents were very much a la Middle Eastern, in the sense that you were not to speak if you entered a room where the prevalent audience was adult.
Absolutely.
You were not to speak unless you were given the floor.
Yeah.
You had to ultimately always acquiesce to the demands and to the commands of the authoritative figures, being mom and dad. And I had both mom and dad. And so to this day, I remember that I had very little agency in my own life until I reached adulthood. When I really wanted a different wardrobe, I had to really supplicate, and I really had to beseech my parents to take me to Sears for me to choose my own outfits. I wanted a certain pair of khaki pants and a certain shirt, and I remember that was one of the first situations where I expressed dissatisfaction with how I had been treated. And that was my first foray into really having my own voice. And then it further extended later on when I told my mom, you know what, this freaking haircut that I've had for so many years has made me very unpopular. It's made me very geeky. It's made me ostracized by my peers. And I want a haircut that I want to own, that I want to choose. And so I grew up as this little kid that was always under the guise and the directing of two very strong parents. And growing up in South LA, I remember always being so bedazzled, if that's a word, by African Americans and the way that they talk to their parents with so much pizzazz and with so much assertion, right? It was always about, no, I don't think that that's right. I don't like the way you're, treating my little brother. I don't like the way that you have just embarrassed me in front of my friends.
Wait, African American kids did that to their parents?
Yes, they did, and maybe it was later in life, maybe more like high school when you grow chutzpah. And you have the ability to really express yourself. But even in high school, I still wrestled with it, and I was encouraged and buoyed by some African American examples in my life where I remember this one girl, Kimberly, who confronted her mother and said, I'm not happy with the way that you are talking to my teacher about my grades in front of all these kids. And of course, the mother equally had an assertive stance, like, well, you're going to take it because I'm your mother, and you're just wait till we get home, right? That gaze that mothers give their kids, especially in the African American community. But I realized then that there was an ability to dialogue and to disagree, and I found that to be a huge breath of fresh air.
And I think it's really interesting because I think being from a culture and being from an ethnicity, your parents are raising you to know that the world doesn't cater to you. It's not, the whole world isn't going to work and dance to your tune, and that you need to be tough. You need to be assertive. You need to have a strong disposition so you can tackle what awaits you out there. I'm not certain, other ethnicities have to go through that because it's not, why would they?
Well, it's interesting that you said that you saw an African American kid talk back to their parents, because let me tell you something. Whoopings were a thing in my household. We called them whoopings. Not even spank. It was a whooping. Right. So anytime when you said that, I kind of was like, what? She talked back to her mama. And when I was younger, I seen and not heard. Seen and not heard was exactly what I was taught. And not that you couldn't express yourself, but when you walked into a room, you introduced yourself to the people in the room. Hello, how are you? My name is Winter. I mean, there was a code of conduct, right. When we went out, you don't act up. And there was a look if you even got out of line. There was no crying. There was no talking back. Even to this day, I have a funny story. So when I was in high school, my girlfriends would come over to my house after school and we would hang out. And my best friend would always say, Winter, did you do the dishes before your mama comes home? Because if she comes home and those dishes aren't done, and did you do this and did you do that? Because I don't want to hear your mama mouth. And I would be like, it's fine. It's not. She'd be like, no, because she's going to cuss you out and I'm going to feel uncomfortable. And so, so growing up, this was kind of just
the norm.
Right.
The norm.
Yeah.
So do you think then that because, okay, let's call a spade, mm-hmm. Our mainstream culture, and I'm going to look at somebody like RuPaul, for example, and her show, The Drag Race, that whole idea of reading somebody, getting somebody a read, basically telling them like it is and giving them back a dose of their own medicine.
All black.
Right? Yeah. So when do women in particular, mm-hmm. At what stage do they learn that amazing skill of reading, and when are you allowed then to implement it in your own life?
As a black woman, it's always been there. As a black woman, it's always been there. In fact, I think going back to what I said about work and being likable, I almost feel like I had to pull back a little bit. In my personal life, in my social life, I will give a read real quick, and in my professional life, I have to pull back because it's there. It's within me.
Isn't that where the expression keeping it real comes from?
I don't
little
know.
bit?
I don't know where the origin of that is.
But isn't that what they're referring to? And you hear, you got to keep it real. Isn't that like that authentic, real, genuine encounter? Like, tell me how it is.
Yes.
Give it to me. I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
Although I
I can
think
handle it.
I think in the general discourse, keeping it real comes from the fact that that tension between a rapper whose origins is in the projects, for example,
Yeah,
and then he
I was
makes a
thinking
lot
about
of
that.
money
Yeah.
and becomes a product of the machine. And so therefore he is this rich guy that really can no longer empathize with the culture of poverty. And so, the newer guys that are basically producing their tapes in basements and in less affluent circumstances, they want to be the voice of keeping it real.
Yeah.
What is really happening out there? And that whole mantra of the struggle is real, that there are people who are in disadvantaged situations that have to have a voice vis-a-vis their rich counterparts that have kind of sold out and are now making it big and have private jets and all the benefits that
Right.
come from being signed by a huge
Yeah.
label.
Yeah. I completely agree with you, Alex. When you said keeping it real, I just thought of a rapper, rapping and, in their gold chains. And so I
So
just have
are
to
we
say
saying
yes.
that comes more from the roots? Like, don't forget what your roots are
Yeah.
or where you came from?
Yes. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to take this opportunity for you to chime in, correct us if we're wrong. If the origins of keeping it real lie elsewhere, we want to be informed. This is definitely a bi-directional conversation. We want you to contribute and educate us on where we may have any kind of knowledge deficiency. So we are on Twitter at Ethnic Correct and on Facebook at Ethnically Correct. And this topic is definitely one that engenders a lot of discussion, especially because confrontation is something we engage in much more often than we acknowledge. And going back to the topic, you were talking about Middle Eastern upbringing, African American upbringing, and Latino upbringing. I remember that when I got to USC, there was a professor who told me that minorities typically have a tougher time entering the realms of higher education and then corporate America because they're not taught how to have peaceful confrontations.
That's
He said,
interesting.
as a Jewish man growing up, at the dinner table, we were always encouraged to play devil's advocate. So if someone had an opinion or if someone had something they wanted to say, an evaluation of a current topic. Let's say it was a Supreme Court decision on abortion or on minority rights, affirmative action, etc. If someone posited an idea, it was the responsibility of the other person at the table, whether it was a brother, sister, nephew, cousin, or whatever, to play the other side, even if that wasn't their own opinion, but they wanted to make the other person a lot more solid in their debating by playing devil's advocate.
And that's so interesting because I grew up in an international environment in London and international school per se. And that is what we were encouraged to do. Education was not about being complacent. It's about being active. We were constantly encouraged to debate, question, interrogate, and never to accept information that's just given. It became the norm. But then you move and you come into different environments and people you notice are very scared about voicing their opinions because of the likability factor. If I tell you what I actually think, will you still like me? And if you don't like me, how will that make me feel? And then, the insecurity and then that cycle starts. And, people, it's important to be liked. You want to be liked in corporate America, especially.
Oh, 100%. I think I've built part of my career on the fact that people like me, and it has influenced me professionally almost to my detriment. And only this last few years have I started to kind of come away from that because, again, like I said, that review, it really threw me. And only then did I say that I've spent this many years trying to be liked, and no matter what, people are going to have their own opinion of you. And what matters most, in my opinion now, is do I like me? Without trying to sound cheesy, Am I proud of the person that I am every day at work? Am I authentic in my beliefs? I don't have to be rude. I don't have to be confrontational, but am I authentic in how I present myself and in what I say, and there are ways to do that, because I do have experiences with people where they say inappropriate things, and I can express my dissatisfaction without being angry. I can express a different opinion without being angry. And I think I used to think that if I had a different opinion of someone, that meant that was confrontation or negative.
I just want to make a statement actually about expression, because that's very interesting you bring that up. So there's a lot of research now that's out there that actually indicates that African American people are constantly diagnosed as having oppositionally defiant conduct disorder, massively overdiagnosed, and sometimes even been sort of historically misdiagnosed as having this condition, which essentially means that you're very argumentative, you don't comply with regulations, you don't accept what's being told. Now, it's very, very interesting. For a very long time, you have to look at why this is happening, and part of it may very well be true. There may be a lot of that going on in the community, sure. But if it's possible that it could also be a way of expression, and the people that have been reading it and placing labels and diagnosis on this kinds of expression are actually don't understand the culture at all and not in it themselves.
So there's a diagnosis for having an attitude problem. You have an attitude.
It's
you
like,
are ODCD.
So that's what that is. Oh, okay. I get it now. Okay, thanks.
That's going to be a hashtag. ODCD.
Oppositionally defiant conduct disorder diagnosed.
And massively overdiagnosed by 67% of African American people at least are constantly diagnosed with this in the mental health world today.
And that's
constantly.
what I was speaking about at some point, is the idea that we have to educate people. And I remember vividly when they televised Whitney Houston's funeral. At that gorgeous church, the pastor, or the pasta, as he would be called.
Hallelujah.
Yes, the pastor basically said, Whitney, not only were you a seminal force and really change people's perception about what it meant to be an African American female entertainer, but in your own death, you brought people to church. And I think he was right. This was the first foray that a lot of folks that were not Black had into what it means to be a member of a congregation at a Baptist Methodist church, and what that means in terms of expression. And I know that I've been to services, growing up Catholic and being Catholic, and, being told, you sit with folded hands at church and you look forward and you don't say a peep. Even when we do the sign of peace, it's all very quiet, very ginger, very sublimated. And, having gone to African American churches, it's the polar opposite. You're supposed to yell at the pastor in agreement and say hallelujah, praise
encouraged
Jesus.
to do so.
Yes, right. And the style of sermon is very much expressive, and you are shouting in jubilation, and you are affirming these truths that you hold to be self-evident. My 11th grade teacher, AP US history teacher, said, when you go to a Catholic funeral, they pass by the body and they may genuflect, and then they may roll down a tear. If you go to a Baptist funeral, it's like they're over the casket yelling and mourning, etc.
Yeah. But
it's this idea that there is a permissibility with expression. And so when we confront people, I had to think, how do I confront people? And I have to say, I was heavily influenced growing up by my Black friends. And so now that I am this full-grown man, if I'm at a restaurant and the service is not up to par...
you read. You give a good read, boo.
I give a good read. I will let it be known that I am dissatisfied with the service. And both of you have seen me express dissatisfaction to people in relation to how they treat me or how they treat the people that are around me. And so I am indebted. I am indebted to culture, and I'm indebted to Middle Eastern folks too, because Middle Eastern folks, when it comes to adults without parents, without any kind of
Right.
authority figure,
Right.
there is heated discussion and
Oh,
debate.
absolutely. There
You
is.
know?
There's a lot of passion there. And it's fueled by, it's fueled by passion. It's not, it's like this raw passion that is kind of there and it's tamed and it's kept under control, but it gets the better of you sometimes, and rightfully so. If you're being, disrespected, you have to stand up for yourself.
And the question I had for you as a Middle Eastern woman growing up in London, how did you negotiate your own Middle Easternness in terms of when you wanted to express dissatisfaction in a heavy British society?
Yeah, so British society, which is very interesting, is not, expression like this is not encouraged. This direct, really raw expression is not advertised, it's not advocated, and I kind of avoided it a little bit because I was in an international school which had a lot of American people, so my experience was slightly different from the general norm, but certainly in the mainstream educational system, the stiff British upper lip, where does it come from? That's where it comes from. Even the Queen doesn't express, or respectfully so, but is not encouraged to kind of express any open displays of affection or emotion. It's a bit more of a reserved society. So the combination of that, and then the opposite of, being Middle Eastern and kind of, and also being a woman, the combination of the two also has left me kind of in a very difficult place where I constantly have to negotiate as to what's correct. How do I say it in this way? How will it affect somebody else? And, it has been my personal struggle.
It sounds like a balancing act.
It is. It really is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it actually, it gives me a little comfort because I was beating myself up for a while, feeling like I have this balancing act. I have to be true to myself, but I also have to be appropriate. And I also have to, almost be the poster child.
Right. And what's being appropriate? This is the thing.
Yeah.
Appropriate in Middle Eastern culture.
Right.
In Western
how
culture.
white people feel.
In African American
that
culture. It means so many
for me,
different things.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. What is appropriate?
And those standards are very different. What's appropriate in one culture is completely inappropriate in another.
There's no one answer.
Yeah. But when you are from one culture and you've been raised with a certain standard and expectations of you in that culture, you are also, if that is not the mainstream culture, what you were raised with, you also have to learn the mainstream culture. And then you have to find where you sit with it.
Right.
Well, I think we've had quite a robust conversation on dissatisfaction, and I think there could be so much more room for discussion, especially in the living rooms of America. And we want to encourage you to tell us how you deal with confrontation and whether that is influenced by your culture. And tell us your stories. I want to know more childhood stories and more adolescent stories, etc. I'm particularly interested in how you show dissatisfaction to your first boyfriend or girlfriend in terms of how they were treating you and making you feel, and how you currently deal with dissatisfaction with your significant other. Is that something that you know how to navigate because both of you are balanced individuals who are, the 1% in the world? Or, are you the person that struggles daily on how to communicate, especially when you are not satisfied with the other's response, with the other's care, or with the other's comportment? So thank you so much for being on this journey. Thank you so much, Tehu. Thank you so much, Winter. Please join us again online at Ethnic Correct for Twitter and Ethnically Correct for Facebook for this amazing podcast crew. And a shout out to Dan Howes, our producer and technical director. I'm Alex Venegas.